Well, good morning. It's great to have you at the Journey Church at the Franklin Theater. My name is Jamie. I'm one of the pastors. We're thrilled to have you with us today. I want to open with a couple of questions. If you're not in the habit of writing or journaling, I want to encourage you to do so. First, question number one. It's an overarching question. What do you hope for? And if you want to draw up a couple of answers in your mind, that's fine. It's more important for me just for you to kind of record that question, something you can think about later. What do you hope for? Perhaps you hope for this. Perhaps, like me, you hope for a world of brilliance and beauty. Perhaps you long for a country filled with justice and peace. Maybe you hope for the love story of God on display in your neighborhood. Maybe it's personal. You hope for your family learning the ways of God. Or more than that, maybe you hope for the healing of your soul. I have a word of encouragement. It will happen. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, here's what I've learned about God. And I'm quoting Tim Keller here. He says, there is a God, there is a future healed world that he will bring about. And our work is to show it in part to others. Our life is but a vapor. We're here for a very short period of time. We're just but one subtle reflection of the kingdom. We're like one leaf on a tree. We as a church are that way. You as an individual are that way. We're just one little reflection of the gospel, which is the good, breaking, dynamic, powerful news that God loves the world. He didn't come here to condemn it. He came here to love it. That we get to do that. This is one little reflection. So in your brief lifespan, how will you reflect the great light, the great hope that God loves this planet and loves individuals? We, as a church, have been asking that question for a decade. If you know our story, I'll just give you a quick rundown, a little bit of our story. I moved to town in 2005. We planted a journey in our living room with 14 people and a bit of a dream. We then formally kind of launched the church in April 2006. In January 2007, we hooked up with another church called Ecclesia, and we merged the two churches together, had a bit of a reboot in January 2007, and we met in the factory for about 10 years. In the early days, we were like, hey, we really don't ever want to have more than one service. As a matter of fact, numbers are not our goal. Our goal is to love people well. Now, we did discover that if you love people well, actually your church will grow, so you will have to deal with the number problem. But we so didn't want to have more than one service. So at one point along the way, we actually asked people not to come. That was new for me in church. I hadn't done that before. But we said, hey, would a portion of you, like 50 of you, not come a week because we were out of chairs? If you wouldn't come and you'd serve, maybe like once a month, don't come, we could create space. And we did that for a couple of years. It bought us a little time. Eventually, we had access to another facility in the factory, a much larger facility, and so we moved there. And then eventually we kind of got over our utopian ideals, and we said, well, you know what, there are people who are in need, they're looking for hope, we don't have enough space, we'll go to 2 services. Keep in mind, we were never going to go past one service. Today we have 4, so we've gotten over that, clearly. We also, we loved the factory. There was no desire to ever buy a building, let's lease. What's the point? Does this town need another building structure? No, let's just lease, let's be nomadic. Until we were asked to leave the factory. Initially, that seemed like it could be a bit of an adventure. You know, we can be nomads. We can walk by faith. But we've learned something about leasing is, number one, you are always at the behest of the landlord, who at any point in time can say, we're done now. And number two, finding a lease, let alone land in this town, is quite difficult. We've had a lengthy quest for about 3 years. And I'm speaking now in a rather nonchalant way, but if you were to ask me about this about 6 months ago, I'd be twitching while I was talking, because it has been a really, really hard journey. It hasn't been easy, and we've been through a lot of transition. We have always held our resources loosely, and one of those resources has been people gifted in leadership. In 10 years, we've either planted or been a part of 10 church plants, and the folks who have left us were staff members or elders. So we have constantly been sending out the people who have been most gifted, who most understand our story, who are most in a place to serve the people of our church. Every year we're sending somebody out. And in the last year, not only did we send out 2 church planters, but we had one of our staff members retire, 2 other staff members moved out of town. We've been in a massive place of loss, grief, transition, and lots of questions. Well, I'm almost to today. I got to give you one more little piece, though, to set up where we are today, because I have some really, really exciting news. And hopefully some of you heard about this as we sent out some emails this week, and we've been praying for the last 30 days. But to give you one last setup that really brings us to a culmination of what's happening today, it's this. About a year and a half ago, when we said, hey, we're going to have to start saving for the future. And there's a biblical principle called the first fruit principle, which is, hey, when you kind of give whatever kind of God gives you, off the top, what do you give back to him? Some people call it a tithe, and there's lots of little kind of biblical principles in there. And so we said, let's do that ourselves. The very first money we take in for whatever future location we go to, let's give it away. So we took in $23,000. We wound up going to a ministry called Franktown. Franktown is a safe haven for children who are really at risk when it comes to drugs, abuse, prostitution. And many of you will have a chance actually to serve with Franktown, because we usually join them in a Christmas thing they do for families, which is amazing. But we were able to give that first fruit. That was a biblical principle for us. God, we want to give back to you the very first offering we ever took for a future site. Second thing that happened is we went to the church and we said, hey, let's get creative on ways to raise money for our future. So probably eventually, all told, we probably had 40 to 50 volunteers got together and came up with this idea called the prop closet. And we brought things of value or things of meaning and gave them away. And in the process, we filmed some of the stories, and we had these kind of amazing stories, and a couple of those we passed around to other places, and they were super inspiring and really amazing. And when all was said and done, we had $30,000 out of what people gave. Well, at that time, a piece of property became available. We call it the Hill property. There's a flagpole on a hill in Franklin. It was really meaningful to us, and we needed $30,000 to put down the first right of refusal. Well, lo and behold, we had $30,000. It just came from Prop Closet. We put it down. We held our first right of refusal, and we went into full investigation mode. So we went on the property. We walked the property. We got with property people to do all their property things. And by the time we were done, we realized it was going to cost $2.6 million just to prepare the property to build on it. And of the 10 acres, you can only build on 3 of the acres. So when all was said and done, the numbers were coming back between $5 and $8 million. And it just didn't feel like the right stewardship thing. So they gave us our $30,000 back, and we said goodbye, and we kept searching. Ironically, they came back to us about a month and a half ago and said, hey, we'd like to offer you the Hill property again. We'll take $1 million off. We said, thanks, but we found another piece of property at Moores Lane and Wilson Pike, and this property is 10 acres, and you can build on 8 of the 10 acres, and it's $2.2 million, and there's a building on it already. And that building is big enough for a full children's ministry. And if we have to in the early days, we could even meet in one of the rooms. It's pretty small, about like Seaboard. We know the first thing we'd have to build is a space for us to gather. But this property became available, and we literally, the day we put our first right of refusal down on it, the next day churches were lining up to buy the property. So on December 11th, we have to have $600,000 to secure a mortgage with our bank. And here's how the numbers work. It's $2.2 million. We've never been in debt. We'd love to come up with $2.2 million and not be in debt. That'd be pretty amazing. And so that's certainly a prayer and a goal and something to pray about for the future. But the second piece is there's an urgency, and that's that we now have about 5 weeks to come up with $600,000. Here's the good news. The $30,000 that we saved, in January, we asked the church to begin to pledge and give over the course of the year toward the future, even though we didn't know what it was, which is hard to do. Because you're like, is the church even going to be around? I mean, we had some of those questions. But people began to give. The $30,000 grew into $200,000. So we have $200,000 saved toward the $600,000 that we'll need in 5 weeks. So in 5 weeks, we have to come up with $400,000. If we come up with $400,000 by December 11th, we can secure a loan with our bank, and we will own property for the first time in our church's history. December 11th also happens to be my 47th birthday. That wouldn't be a bad gift. So how about that? So there's at least a little drama in the whole thing. Thank you. And I just, one of the things I wanted to do is just say to you as a church, you have been faithful. And there are lots of people that, it's been hard. And some folks, the ambiguity and not knowing where we're going was too much, and kind of a world of instability. It was too hard to hang on. And I get it for some of them. Some of my friends who are going, hey, my whole world is unstable. I need something I can hold on to. And yet you have remained, and you've been faithful. Some of you maybe have returned, and some of you are brand new, and you're going, hey, okay, interesting story. But here's where we are today. And as I said, we've always held this stuff loosely. The goal has never been buildings and budgets and baptisms, and the goal has never been some kind of abstract numerical thing or just to own dirt. The goal has been to love people. But we're recognizing clearly in the 3 years of learning it at street level that without bricks and mortar, without some dirt, we're going to have trouble effectively loving people. I got a phone call from a guy today. We sent out an email to our church this week just letting everybody know what's happening. And he called me. He doesn't go to our church. He lives in the Midwest, and his kids don't go to our church, though they visited. One goes to college in Iowa, one lives in St. Louis, and one lives in Columbia, and one goes to college in Indiana. He called me. He said, I saw your email, and I saw that your church is now going to have a piece of property and land. He goes, let me tell you what that means to me as a guy who has kids who may one day find their way to your church. I said, what do you mean? He goes, your church is special. It's unique. There aren't many like it in the country. It would not surprise me at all if my children wind up there, that they move to Nashville to be a part of Journey. And it also wouldn't surprise me if I eventually have grandkids. And now that you have a church building in dirt, that tells me you're set up for generations to come. I'm sending a check for $50,000. I want to be a part of this. Yeah. And I had another gentleman this week say, I told him that story, and he said, well, if he's in for 50, I'm in for 50. So we're 100,000 toward our goal. Those were two great phone calls this week. So there's a card that is, I think, on your, if you didn't get one, it should be on your chair or where you were sitting. There's some in the back. Would you take this home this week and would you pray about it? We have stations here around the room. If you're new to Journey, we call them stations. They're just places. After my message, there's kind of a worship experience, and there's a lot of time. Like, we don't kind of rush through it. There's space to move around and pray and take communion, give. At these stations today, we have buckets of dirt from the land. So scoop some of the dirt up, put it in a plastic bag, take it home, sprinkle it on the dining room table or kitchen table or whatever, and say, kids, play with the dirt while you're eating. Because this dirt right here may have a whole lot to do with the rest of your life. And let's pray together as a family how we can give to it. Because it may just be that on that dirt you'll find Jesus for the first time. It may just be that on that dirt you're going to make a relationship that you'll have for a lifetime. It may just be that on that dirt you're going to wind up praying for somebody who is in need. It may just be that on that dirt you're going to heal in ways you never imagined. So God is a God of provision, and we walk in faith. I'm learning something about discipleship. Disciples follow him bewildered as they often are, while enemies oppose him, clear-minded though they be. And I'm quoting Mark Buchanan, but I love this. Sometimes, the eye of the critic can be really clear and concise about why things won't work. But disciples actually often have to walk around in the dark not knowing. And we've walked for a long season of not knowing. We've lived in the tension. And this is what God has called us to do, because this is where we get to express faith. And depending on your faith tribe, depending on kind of your religious background, you may look at faith different ways. And so I thought, here's a season where we really have to walk in faith, not just for the Journey Church and for a piece of property, but really the expression of our future and honestly, faith regarding how we engage culture. And our culture's had some significant shifts. And there are lots of things at play right now in American culture. And so how do we walk with faith? What is faith? And so we're going to go to a story of a guy who is very much immersed in culture. He was a captain in the army of the enemy in Jesus' day. So this is the story of a military officer. And it's interesting to see the way this man engaged with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here you have someone of a different ethnicity who's a soldier who's really occupying another country, and this man is drawn to the God that we all love and serve. And so let's go to a story, Luke chapter 7, verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all this in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. He'd been doing a teaching. Capernaum was the town they were living in. There's a centurion's servant whom his master valued highly, and he was sick and about to die. And the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to ask him, or sent to the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. Now that asking word is important. Remember the word ask. So he asked, which is kind of interesting. You have this powerful Roman soldier, captain, military officer, asking the people that he's in charge of, that he's subjugated. Probably he's, at some point along the way, killed people in their race. He's been an officer in the army for some time. And so he asks these people that are subjugated for something that he needs. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him. Now, this is also interesting in this story of these Jewish leaders. I mean, they hate the Roman Empire. They often hate the Romans. But for this guy, there's something about him. They're pleading on his behalf to Jesus. So picture them coming to Jesus. Now, the other thing is they're pleading to Jesus. That's also an interesting thing at play right now. This is kind of early on in Jesus' ministry. They have still questions who he is, but they recognize he has this some kind of miraculous power thing. And so they go to him, and they plead with Jesus earnestly and say, this man deserves to have you do this, which basically means bring healing into his life, heal this servant that he had great affection for. Another interesting thing. This man deserves, remember that word, to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve. Now, I'm always kind of pointing out little literary elements in the Bible. Notice the flip right here. Hey, you should go see this guy. He deserves it. He says, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. There's a doublet there. First he says I don't deserve, then he's expressing it at a deeper level. This is how unworthy I am. Clearly, this military officer understands something about authority, and then he drops into it. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. I say to that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. This is the only recorded time we have that word is used, that Jesus is amazed. Actually, there's one other time, and it's the opposite. Jesus is amazed at the lack of faith in his hometown. The only two times you get that phrase, that Jesus is like in awe. He's amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following, he said, whoa, I tell you, I've not found such great faith, even in Israel. Then the men who'd been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Another quote from Mark. Faith is resting so utterly in the character of God, in the ultimate goodness of God, that you trust him even when you don't understand him, even when he seems untrustworthy. Trusting the character of God and the goodness of God. If I'd taken time to kind of open this up with a monologue today, I would have probably set the scene. I would have said, imagine a table and you've got the husband, you got the centurion and his wife walks in and says, hey, I just checked on him. He's going to die. He's sick. I know he's been dedicated and loyal to our family for however many years, and I know how much you love him, but I'm just telling you, he's going to die. And then centurion says something about, but I've been learning so much about the God of these people. I think the God of these people has the ability to save. And I've been hearing about this man who claims to be the Messiah, which is the sent one from God. I think there's a power about him. I understand authority. If I would submit to him and he'd access the power of this God who I'm learning about, remember he just helped build a synagogue, which is also kind of interesting, an outsider who's contributing to this other church space. If there's something about him that I believe I can trust. And I believe this man has authority, regardless of what doesn't seem right and how upset I am or how angry I am or how disappointed I am. I understand something about authority. I understand something about trust. And so he gets up from the table and he walks out and he goes to the Jewish leader and he asks them for help. Now, I don't know about you, but I grew up kind of, how many, are there any Stranger Things fans out there? Do we have any Stranger, a few of you? All right. So I was reading a guy who, Stranger Things, it takes place around 1983. It's a Netflix miniseries. But the setting is 1983, which is like wheelhouse of my childhood. So, I mean, watching the whole thing was a nostalgic experience. I didn't anybody have to do anything. I would just watch the clothing and the toys, and I was happy. But I was reading a review on it, and the guy made this comment. I can't remember if I brought this up with you guys before, but he made the comment. He was explaining to a millennial, because some millennials were saying, I don't understand why these kids were riding their bikes at night in the dark in the middle of the woods. Like, where were their parents? And I'm like, well, that was my entire childhood. Like, and I loved this reviewer who was explaining. He said, no, this was the age of free-range children, and like that's pretty good. Now, arguably, we could call it neglect, right? I mean, maybe there was some of that going on. But I kind of loved my childhood full of freedom. So I grew up pretty independent. I grew up kind of like the kids in that show, like on my own a lot. I was the firstborn, and I have three sisters that all came after me, so my parents were kind of busy. So I was just off on my own a lot, just doing stuff. And as a result, I think the firstborn thing in me, I think growing up in the north in kind of a blue-collar town, you kind of suck it up and you rub dirt on it, you get through it, there's a little bit of that in me. I have kind of this independent streak. It's hard for me to ask for what I need. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but sometimes it's just hard to ask for what you need. In this case right here, you have a Roman soldier, a powerful man who has been a part of subjugating a country, now going to religious leaders and asking for what he needs. He displays, there's a humility in this man that if you really took time to just kind of sit in this story for a while and just kind of let the aromas surround you. But this is the kind of guy that you're like, well, when I go to heaven, who do I want? Like, I want to meet that guy. He's such an interesting guy. There's this humility about him. But there's a confidence and power. You can kind of feel it in the story as you listen to this centurion speak. And then, of course, when you see Jesus' response to him. But he speaks out what he needs. So one of the principles we have is ask for what you need. Right now, some of you are in great need. How much are you talking to God about it? Some of you may be asking for what you need on Facebook. Like, how effective is that? Regardless of whether your outcome happened or not this past week, I've got friends, they're a disaster. And I understand our passions get engaged. We've got deep convictions. We're meant to speak out about truth. I don't deny any of those things, and we have a sense of responsibility and stewardship for us being a citizen of a nation. I agree with all those things. But where is our trust? See, if we're spun out in anxiety and worry, then we have forgotten who's in authority, which is something we've been talking about for a few weeks. In this case, Jesus wants us to speak out what we need. Hey, Jesus, America could use some help. Jesus, I'm concerned about this, or I'm hopeful for that. Here are the needs, not just for me, but for my fellow citizens. And so there is this great display of humility, not in arguing your viewpoint, but in asking for what you need. And the way of the kingdom is a display of humility. The one in power acknowledges his powerlessness. The oppressor asks for help from the oppressed. Isn't that interesting? This is an example of the world is upside down. This is the kingdom. Here we have yet again this wonderful example of this is how if you talk about the kingdom of God, Jamie, and the rhythms of the kingdom, and I'm supposed to align with God's way. What does it look like? Here again is an example of what it looks like. Some of you are in positions of power or authority How often do you go to those perhaps who maybe you're their direct report, but ask them for something? See, it's just a display of humility. The captain displays the benefits of being under someone's authority. And let me give you a quick piece on this. Somebody sent me this week, they sent me millennials, they sent me I'm trying not to understand, I'm trying to interact with you gently. But somebody sent me a video of a millennial, it was a satire on millennials, and it was hysterical. I thought about showing it, but I wasn't sure millennials you'd have the ego strength to handle watching it. So, because I just thought you're going to be angry with me or whatever else. So if you just look up satire millennial video or whatever, but it was sponsor a millennial. I'm telling you, it was really funny. You know, like child sponsorship, but sponsor a millennial. It was very clever. Anyway, and here's the deal. Like, millennials, I love you. I've spent my last 25 years, honestly, with you because I was a youth pastor for 13 years, and in many ways I feel like you, so I identify. But I want to say, here's a place where I think you got the shaft. We've come such a long way, I think, in dealing with oppressive leadership and authoritarian structures, but I don't think our culture has helped you in some ways, and that's understanding the benefits of authority. This man's displaying the benefits of authority. If you've been a coach, then you had an AD you had to respond to. If you've been a teacher, you had to respond to a principal. If you are functioning in a business, you had a boss. Depending on where you are in the business, you have a direct report. There are actually really wonderful benefits to authority. Those of you who go, I just want to be purely entrepreneurial in every way, I don't want to have to answer to someone. If you have lived that life for any number of years or you're currently living it, that's not a bad thing, and we love being entrepreneurial. So, I mean, we blow wind in the sails of being entrepreneurial. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying to you, you have to understand if that's the case, you're actually at risk. Because you don't have the benefit of being under authority. Being under authority helps teach you something about submission and humility. Because sometimes you actually have to submit to someone who's not right. And you learn about functioning in a less than ideal world because the world is broken and people don't always get it right. Outside of that, we live in a certain utopia, and we're constantly frustrated when people don't treat us the way we're supposed to be treated, and this entitlement thing comes up, and we're scratching our heads, and we just can't understand why someone would make a leadership decision that affects us in a negative way. The reason for that is we haven't had the reps of being under authority. By the way, this is the great gift of marriage. Marriage creates friction on purpose. Like, that's part of the goal for marriage. Marriage is the path to humility. Am I right, those of you who have been married? Faithfulness to one person forces you to clearly recognize that person's weaknesses and imperfections and still love them. Or in some cases, for those of you whose marriages have ended, some cases that it's had to be boundaries. But you realize that spending life with someone means there's this constant negotiation. You know what you're really saying? You know what negotiating is? I give up my preference. I submit to your role here. I submit to your strength here. I submit to your gift here. That's what you're doing back and forth in marriage. That's what negotiating is. It's a bit of a submitting and surrendering to one another's authoritative moment because they have insight, because they have wisdom, because they have the gift. That's what it is. And so when we buck up against submission or surrender, or we don't want any authority in our lives, we're actually hamstrung. We're deficient. Life is going to be more painful and more difficult because we're entitled to life functioning the way we want it to. This soldier understood the benefit of authority because he was like, look, I'm an authority. I answer to somebody. I tell other people what to do. This is easy for me. Clearly, you're the authority of the universe. So let me just submit. There's almost kind of a nonchalant, like it's not dramatic. He's not super emotional. There's kind of a like, well, clearly if you're God's son, or if you're the Messiah, whatever he was putting together, you have authority. So I'm not worthy enough to be in your presence. And this is interesting. The Pharisees, the religious people are going, oh, God, you should do this for him because he deserves it. They're measuring his worth as they would evaluate themselves on the externals. I'm good enough, so God, you should perform. He says, I'm not good enough, so actually the only way you'll do this for me is out of your grace. I actually can't force you to do this. I can't manipulate you to do it. I can't play a negotiation game like, hey, I did this many good things, so... There's zero entitlement. It's a complete trust and a recognition of who's in authority. So let me give you a couple other questions. We don't have time to answer them, but I want to give you some questions. These are for this week. What do you believe about God? Is God a tit-for-tat God? Like, you do this, he does that. You do that, he does this. Like, this is how it works, man. God does that, he blesses me. Like, what do you believe about God? That's an important baseline element to your theology, what you understand about the divine. Number 2, how powerful is he? Does he really set the rulers of nations in place? Is he outside of a man-made political structure? How powerful is God? Do you recognize his authority? And really wrestle this one down. Don't give up, just go, yeah, it's God. Do you recognize his authority? And the last one, how do you believe you gain access to that power? Depending on your faith background, you may have been taught, because this has been a pretty steady stream of theology for probably about 30 or 40 years, that it's been a steady stream. You can put it in theology through the time of Jesus. But in particular, there's been this bent in American culture that we have to do enough good things to earn God's favor. If we do enough spiritual practices or spiritual disciplines, you have enough quiet times, you pray enough prayers, you go to church enough, you give enough, then you have earned a certain place with God or maybe position in heaven. But that's just not the gospel. The gospel is that God loved us in spite of our brokenness. While we were yet sinners, he loved us. So this is really important. That means on your best day, you're not good enough for God. And on your worst day, you're not farther than his reach. Maybe for some of you today, an action point for you today is just to allow yourself to feel some compassion for yourself. Like, give some compassion to you. You're like, how could God love me? The brokenness, the stuff I've done. Like, I know you're scaling it on like all the awful things or the shame you feel or whatever else, but God's just going, hey, I created you, I love you, I want a relationship with you. Period. Regarding your behavior and that stuff, I'm going to give you ways to move forward, to break cycles, to love me, to display love, to connect with people in a healthy way. I can guide you through that process, but like, that doesn't earn my love. I just love you. And for those of you who are parents in a healthy relationship with your child, you get this principle. I love my kids, even when they're morons. And I'm being playful. I don't want to dehumanize my children, but what I'm saying is, like, I love my kids even when they do things that aren't right. It doesn't mean I stop loving them. There are consequences, there are admonishments, there are encouragements when they do things right. God is the same way. Last question for you. What are your secretly internalized opinions of yourself? What are your secretly internalized opinions of yourself? If you go, I got some stuff, but I'm pretty good. I mean, it's those other people, they got issues. Are you watching TV and you're like, unbelievable. I mean, I got some stuff, but not like these people. Watch how subtle the judgment comes up. Where do you go? I'm just as broken as they are. Their behavior may be playing out differently. But if I climb up underneath my motives, if I had the ability to peel the layers back from the onion and see, there's this depravity in me. Like, I'm a selfish person apart from God. I want what I want. I'm really into my convenience and my comfort, and I want people to like me, and I want a degree of power and control. Like, all that stuff's on the underbelly of selfishness. And if you can hold that and go, that's real, and I'm going to struggle with it till I die, and the power of God flowing through me is pure and delightful and beautiful and full of life and light and love. And they both exist inside me. They war with each other. Paul talks about this at length in the book of Romans. So the question is really not about what I deserve. That's something the Pharisees and religious leaders didn't get right. Jesus spent 3 years trying to unpack that for them. The soldier did. The soldier believed he didn't deserve the access to the power of God. He understood submission. Let me give you 2 statements and I'm going to wrap up. The power of God is supremacy we submit to, not a sword we wield. So if you come from a background where you use a lot of power of God terminology, and hey, we're going to use the power of God. The power of God's going to America, but the power of God, with the power of God, we're going to the power of God, so the power of God. If I just the power of God, if we access the power of God, because I just need some more of the power of God. If there's a lot of that terminology in your faith background, I just want to make sure it's clear that that power of God is something you submit to, not something you wield. So it's there. And you might be really passionate about it. But the primary way to access the power of God is submission. When this moment happens with this man, I want to leave you with one last statement because I want to answer the question I started with in the beginning about faith. When you look through the story of this man and you see him ask for what he needs, speak in humility, recognize that he's unworthy, and we see that God responds, and his prayer is answered. What do we understand about faith? The power is not in the man's faith, but in the Savior's word. And the soldier recognized it. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. That's where the power is. It's not like, if I could just churn up enough more inside me, then God will. No. Related to this building, I'll give you a practical piece for me. There were times, in particular, maybe a year and a half ago, if you were like, Jamie, what kind of faith do you have for the, our future location building? I'd be like, I got like that much. I got a lot, man. This is an adventure. This is awesome. I just love living in the tension. Because of God, I got lots of faith. Let's go. If you asked me this about 6 months ago, I'd be like, I got maybe that big. Because I feel beat up and run down and abandoned and lost and full of questions and turmoil. But I still believe. And I have this little mustard seed-sized faith. It's shrunk quite a bit. I've aged a lot in 11 months. But I got that. And I can bring that. And you know the thing about God? Whether I got that or whether I got that, he's going to be faithful. It's not based on me. It's not based on you. He's God, the great divine. He's hung the stars in place. He's allowed us to see the moon the way we get to see it the next couple days. He's so creative. And he's orchestrating a symphony of struggle and beauty. And we get to be in it. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you. God, I thank you even for the gift of pain. I thank you for struggle. I recognize its benefit. I see how, God, through difficulty, you carve out holiness. And I know you've pushed me to be more wholehearted and to know you in deeper ways and to trust you in deeper ways. And God, thank you for the way you've been faithful to our church. And God, we believe you'll be faithful to our country. So allow us to walk in a place of peace, a place of trust, and recognize that this world is on your shoulders, not ours. God, for my brother or sister who is bearing the weight of the world right now, their neck is tense, their shoulders are tense, the stress is so intense. God, would you just allow them to let it go? This is your burden to carry. not theirs. Their finances, their marriage, this country. Would you stretch us in this season in our church, both in the way we serve and how we give? Hold that vision in front of us for what the future might be like for generations to come. Thank you for calling us to the throne, inviting us to worship, always giving us perspective. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Again, if you're a guest with us, I just want to remind you, we've got stations around the room. Ethan's going to sing. You can sit, kneel, stand, sing, come. Just don't miss this time. Just sit in the presence of God. If the Spirit is speaking, lean into that. If you just need to listen, if you need to pray, just go into a time of prayer. An act of submission is to come and take communion and go, I recognize I can't save myself. Tearing the bread, dipping it in the cup and partaking is an act. It's a reenactment. It's a dramatic reenactment of saying, I submit, I recognize my salvation is from you. That's what that is. It's a dramatic moment of remembering, creating a neural pathway in your brain that says, God, you're my rescuer. So just engage with God, be in his presence.